Welcome to our presentation today. Thank you for signing up and attending. Just letting you all know that we are recording the meeting, and that's for everybody's benefit. We will circulate a recording of this after, so you can share it with your teams. Just a few housekeeping items. If you have questions during the presentation, feel free to raise your hand or plop them in the chat. We'll do our best to answer them as we're going along. Otherwise, we plan to leave significant time for questions and answers at the end. We will also not include questions and answers in the recording in case you want to ask anything specific to your operation, and we'll just follow up with an anonymous Q&A follow up to what you guys asked and what our answers were. So Mark and I put this together today for you guys because we're starting to notice that many states, particularly Michigan here, is giving out quite a few violations and doing quite a few inspections. And these can turn into very costly fines for your operation. And I think we all know that running a cannabis business is already quite costly. So we put together this presentation as an educational tool, and to also let you guys know that we're here as a resource for some of these things that are coming up. So thank you for joining today, and with no further ado, we'll get started. You can switch the slide. Okay, we're going to go over a few things today. First thing is a little team introduction, just so you know more about Mark and myself. Then we're going to dive into understanding the inspection process, depending on where you are in your operations. This could be valuable information. And then navigating Cannabis Regulatory Agency or CRA interactions and responses. And then we'll dive into the top 4 violations that we saw in 2023. And then we'll just give a brief overview of the things that Mark and I can help you with. This is really meant to be an educational tool, not a sales pitch, but we do realize that there's not a lot of resources in this industry. So we want to make sure that you understand we're here to help. And then we'll have questions and answers. Okay, Mark, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Mark Waller. I am the co-managing partner of Morem Waller CPAs. We are a full-service CPA firm. We're based in Minnesota. We work across the country, and we specialize in cannabis. So we really help businesses mostly on the day-to-day accounting side, month-end close, all the way through to preparing tax returns, and definitely passionate about the industry and really excited to be here. So thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So my name is Aly Piscatelli. I'm the owner of Budding Operations. We're a compliance consulting firm based in Denver, Colorado. I've been in the regulated cannabis industry for 12 years. I started as an employee, so I know a lot about operations and managing all the things that go along with that. And I started Budding Operations in 2015 to help license holders like yourself, particularly with METRC and inventory control compliance. At this point, we do all things compliance, but my specialty background is METRC. So we like to basically bridge the gap between the license holders and METRC themselves. I'm sure you've experienced that METRC can't answer questions for you on specific regulations. So it's always good to have somebody in the middle of those questions. Okay, yep, you're good. All right, we'll do understanding the inspection process first. So when you obtained your license, you signed an attestation, basically a written consent that you're consenting to inspections, and you're consenting to the agency coming on site, requesting business records. Particularly, they even specifically mention financial records. And this really just is something you're signing away when you get your license, and even when you apply for the license. This attestation indicates that they can come on site during any regular business hours and that they don't have to provide notice. And this really just means that you have to be prepared, right? Expecting them to come at any time. And one of the few ways to be prepared is make sure that your staff and employees are aware that inspections are mandatory and that they know how to handle inspectors, and even creating a point person for inspections, and that your business records are always organized. Okay, so who has the authority to inspect? So the CRA can bring in their agents and investigators, right? Allowing them into the facility is a requirement. You also have to allow any auditors into the facility, and the regulations don't really expand on who an auditor would be, but I can only assume that this means financial auditors, maybe state or local auditors when it comes to food inspections or fire inspections, which is also listed on here. But anybody that the CRA allows into the facility or considers an agent of theirs would be allowed in. Also state police, but there's also local authority police that have the right to enter your premises, and the fire department. And the fire department's really big on the manufacturing side when it comes to extraction equipment and techniques. So being aware that any of those people can come really at any time. You might see someone like the fire department pre-licensure and years following. Always a good idea to create good relationships with these authorities. So what can they inspect? So, what can I expect? When can I expect an inspection? So there's a mandatory pre-licensure inspection that I'm assuming if you're a license holder, you've already gone through. They must inspect the physical property for compliance prior to giving you your final licensure. So you'll definitely see somebody before you open. You have to provide a certificate of occupancy or alternative from the local building authority. And if applicable, there'll be a fire inspection at that time as well. Operational inspections, so these can be triggered by a lot of different things. Customer complaints, complaints from other license holders, or just general compliance observations that the CRA has made. If you haven't received an operational inspection yet, I would definitely expect one towards the renewal date, towards the renewal time. During a renewal, you are required to show that you're still compliant with local zoning and any local cannabis laws. If you got an infraction locally during that time, during the 1 year period that your license is valid, you would have to disclose that. They're checking to make sure that you haven't done any changes of ownership or anything of that nature without reporting that to them when that occurs. So the renewal is another really big time that the CRA is looking at your license and looking at your information. But that does not mean that they can't come anytime that you're operational during normal business hours. Another thing they say about the renewals is that making sure your annual financial statements are reported. So again, they're really harping on the financials here, which is why we have Mark to explain some of that in a little bit. You can renew as early as 90 days before your expiration date, and I don't suggest waiting too long. This could be a long process. It's basically a regurgitation of your initial license. So making sure that you know when that date is and that you're prepared. Okay, what are they looking at? So everything they're looking at is to make sure that you're in compliance with the acts and rules and regulations, right? So everything that you're doing in any processes, any record keeping, anything of that nature. They are looking at the physical location. This might include signage that's hanging up on the wall, that your physical location matches the site plan that you've indicated, that the rooms are being used for what you indicated they're being used for. This one's really important and goes back to the employee training, is that individuals and employees are part of this inspection. You might have a point person who's handling the CRA inspection, but if they say they want to talk to John, who's using the extraction machine, they have every right to do so. So you should make sure that your employees know that part of their employment, and I see a lot of people put this in their employee handbooks, that they're consenting to inspection of themselves as well, a verbal inspection, or they might ask them questions. So making sure that your team is trained up on that and knows how to respond, and also know that you are a resource for compliance. I think that's a really big part of that. Number 4 is cannabis transportation vehicles. So this would be any transportation business to business, right? If you have any designated vehicles, these vehicles are considered part of your facility. And the last one is general records. So this includes really anything that you've ever written down or typed on your computer, right? These can be stored paper, digital, combination of both. But this also includes the METRC system or any third-party systems that you're using. So basically anywhere that you're storing business information or records are subject to inspection and can be requested. So it's important to keep in mind here if there's standard operating procedures that you're required to have, or logs such as waste logs, that all of those are up to date and available. The faster you can provide that information, then hopefully we can avoid the next steps, which would be a written notification or a written violation. Okay, Mark.
So getting to the financial part of all of these inspections, it's really, really vital that you really start with your accounting, because accounting is really kind of the lifeblood of your business. Everything that you do on the accounting side touches everything that you do on the compliance side, which means that everything from coming into your business, money in and out, as well as inventory, purchasing fixed assets for your business, etc., you're going to need financial records for all of that. It's important to do anyway because of your tax filings that you need to file, and knowing that cannabis businesses are already at an audit risk just by existing are for the IRS. It's important to do this anyway, but in particular in Michigan, there is very much written into the regs specifically what you need to do to be compliant. And the process then of filing what they call an AFS, which is essentially an audited financial statement, which is their methodology of how to kind of format the financial information in a way that works for Michigan. It's really important that you are mindful of that from day one. So the things that are actually written into the regs that the Michigan is looking at are cash logs, sales records, purchases of inventory, invoices, receipts, deposit slips, canceled checks, tax records, compensation records, pretty much anything that has to do with your business. If there is a record for it, you probably should save it. The good news is that many, if not all, accounting services that you work with, software allows you to save records directly onto the transactions. So knowing that, in particular in Michigan, that you will be having this type of examination, it's a good practice to just know that you're going to need an audit trail from day one. So big picture, what is being inspected for financial records, assume that pretty much everything is going to be inspected, and that includes every receipt, anything that you would consider potentially part of your business has the potential to be inspected.
Great, thanks, Mark. So navigating the CRA inspections and responses. So I'm just going to walk us through what this process looks like. If you haven't received a violation yet, this is good information to have. If you have received a violation, this is a great refresher. Okay, so violations can be directly issued to a person or the license holder, the license entity, right? So this goes back to the fact that everybody that's an employee that's working for you really needs to understand what they're responsible for and what the regulations are, because they're subject to violations as well. I think probably the biggest example of this would have been what happened with Sweet Leaf in Colorado, maybe about 4 years ago now, and employees went to jail. I mean, it's very important as a license holder to give your employees these resources and to protect yourself through that as well. An on-site inspection. So it looks like we have a little issue there. Sorry about that. We'll fix it on the recording. So an on-site inspection, they would come on site and they would give you a notice of violation. So they would go through the whole process, walk the facility, ask questions, ask for records to be produced. And if they couldn't be produced and they didn't give you time to produce that at a later date, because all these records are supposed to be kept available at all times, then you would receive a notice of violation. And this would detail what specific regulations cited that you violated. These notices of violation can turn into fines or sanctions or both. So we've noticed that most people get both, depending on the severity of the violations, but in almost every case, there's a fine associated. So like I mentioned, money's tight in this industry. It's not worth risking. And then then the next step is to remedy the issue. But if you can't remedy the issue or you disagree with the notice of violation, you have the right to request a hearing. Now, I see this a lot, especially with any sort of license suspension. You want to get open again as fast as possible. Every day counts. So just know you always have the right to request a hearing, but that is somewhat of a larger process that I'll go through in a little bit. Then there's a disciplinary action report, which is basically a regurgitation of the notice of violation, but these reports are public information. And that's actually how Mark and I sort of discovered how many violations are being given out in Michigan on a yearly basis. So some of the penalties. So you can get a warning, and this warning is basically like being on probation. You're under a warning for 1 year. This also means that they're looking at you closer than they were for that year. These are issued for reasons of repeated non-compliance. So if they come in today and they give you a notice of violation about your METRC records, and then they come in 6 months and give you another notice of violation about your METRC records, they're most likely going to issue a warning, this probationary warning. Formal complaints. So these could be issued by the agency, and these, like I mentioned, complaints can come in from consumers, from other license holders, from agency observations. And within 21 days of receiving one of these formal complaints, you have to demonstrate that you are now in compliance, or meet with the agency, or request a hearing. So there are a lot of avenues, but I definitely suggest just coming into compliance if it's something that is easy to do. Now, something like a financial compliance violation might take more time than 21 days. So you might want to contact the agency and give them a progress update, right? We're working on this. This is who we're working with. These are the steps we're taking, and it's going to take us this many days to complete this. But definitely don't wait too long to communicate with them, so that they know you're taking this seriously. So penalties, like I mentioned, can be for a person, for the applicant, or the license holder. And it can be a combination of these things. So they can deny your license or your renewal. They can put limitations on your license. This might be, you can't tear up a plant canopy size until you get into compliance or something like that. They can ask you to cease operations, which can be very costly, or they can suspend your license or revocate your license. So like I mentioned, the best thing to do is attempt to get into compliance as fast as possible. These fines can be very costly. So a license holder or a licensee can receive a fine up to $10,000 or the total of daily gross receipts if you're making over than $10,000 a day. And these can be assessed and added to every day that you're out of compliance. So every day past that 21 response time. And an individual can get up to a $5,000 fine. We're pretty familiar with what people make in this industry, and I don't have $5,000 sitting around to pay a fine. Okay, next slide. So demonstrating compliance. These are the top 3 ways that I've seen people demonstrate coming into compliance. And usually it's an update to a standard operating procedure. Standard operating procedures are living, breathing documents and really should change all the time, not only based on regulations, but based on your own company efficiencies. Employee training. So the best way to mitigate something is to say, we updated this procedure, we retrained everybody, here's a record of the training, and now we're monitoring our employees on this specific violation. A good example would be not checking IDs or selling to an underage customer, right? You'd want to retrain everybody on ID checking, maybe get an ID scanner, show that you're leveling up your procedures in that particular area. And then implementing these compliance systems. So it's really important to make sure that you're monitoring your employees at all times. I don't want to use the word micromanaging, but checking in, quizzing your employees, maybe doing mock inspections, and making sure that whatever you say you're going to do to bring something into compliance is actually being enforced at your business. All right, consent case hearings. So this would be sort of, we've seen a lot of people request these, but this would really be the last step, right? If you can't bring yourself into compliance, or you definitely don't agree with the notification, or it's difficult to bring yourself into compliance, you can request a case hearing. So you can proceed directly to this hearing. You don't even have to try to bring yourself into compliance. I just think the hearings can be a long, drawn out process that you're really starting to expose yourself in. You must request this within 21 days of the formal complaint being filed. So once you get that notification of violation, it's important to sit down and determine what you're going to do to remedy the issue. And once you request this hearing, the agency will reply with a notice of the hearing, which will provide the date, time, and regulatory details that will be discussed in this hearing. If you go down any one of these paths, coming into compliance, consent hearing, meeting with the agency, it's very important to have documentation prepared and supporting documentation. An example would be you had the ID verification violation, right? You have your updated SOP, you have the training log, and maybe now you're using a log in your point of sale that verifies that you checked IDs, right? So bringing examples of all of that is all supporting evidence that you're getting into compliance. Okay, the top 4 violations, and we culminated this data from public information on the website. This is all looking at 2023 at this time. So here's a chart of out of the 398, so basically 400 reported violations in 2023. We're going to talk about the top 4 here today. So you can see the biggest one is AFS non-compliance. So Mark is going to go into those details, but think again, all things financials, right? There's a few other things on here that we won't get into in detail today. But surveillance and security was one, sampling and testing, packaging and advertising, basically hits all parts of the regulation. So if you're not familiar with the regulations yet, it's a great idea to review those to prepare yourself for the types of things that they're looking for here. Okay, Mark, take it away.
All right. Yeah. So like you just saw, AFS noncompliance is by far the most common violation. Almost 38% of the total violations are AFS noncompliance, which again, like I said earlier, it really touches everything you do. So if you're an inventory manager, if you're managing retail, if you're doing kind of anything at any step of the way, there are controls in place for organizations that everybody really has to pitch into to make sure that financials are ready to go for the audit that is being done in Michigan. So the things that are kind of the most important pieces to ensure that you are that you're safe with your accounting is first starting with just having those strong accounting procedures, what we call vital accounting. So month over month financials, if you're working with an accountant who produces financial statements, you should be seeing them at least quarterly, if not monthly, and understand that if in general, if your financials kind of balance sheet balances, if your P&L balances, and that you've been able to work with your accountants throughout the month, you're probably in pretty decent shape. But it's really important to keep that going because a cleanup job is really messy and can cost business owners money if they're not able to produce inventory or receipts and things like that that could be used as deductions, as well as important for just this particular audit. Regulatory compliance. So really having documentation that proves out all of your numbers. So one of the examples in the instructions for the AFS form in Michigan actually goes through specifically what you might see. And one of the things that you see very commonly is trying to tie those numbers that you have for revenue coming out of your POS to METRC. And if there is a difference, you actually have to explain what the difference is. So again, having that compliance from the top means that you are able to explain any differences. Obviously, you want to be able to explain them, and if they're minor, usually the regulatory agents will pass it through. But if there's big reconciliations that nobody knows what or why the reason is, you're probably going to have some issues. Just having a firm when you're actually ready to do the AFS report, you literally have to have a CPA firm perform that report, and the CPA firm needs to have a firm license, needs to have a CPA license number, the individual who's actually performing it, and that firm needs to have a peer review, which is a specific thing that state licensure requires if you are a CPA firm that produces attestation engagements, of which this is one. So you'd be surprised how many accountants are in the industry who are not CPAs. And so you can't hire a bookkeeper to do this. It has to be a CPA who's licensed in a state. It doesn't have to be Michigan, but it does need to be a CPA who is licensed in whichever state they are domiciled in. METRC reconciliation, I covered that a little bit, but it's really important to have METRC because that's the piece really that connects with the compliance that Aly's talking about. And when Aly and I work together, in a sense, I'm handling the accounting side, she's handling the METRC, and we always want things to come together there. And obviously the pennies don't have to match exactly, but we should know if they don't, why they don't match. Expenses, obviously every piece of documentation is important, but not just having receipts for things like utilities or purchasing of inventory, but also contracts that you may have, leases, management agreements, all of those documents that in addition to providing receipts, you also want to be able to provide those signed agreements those are very important to see for the regulators. And then owner oversight. So when we say that, a lot of times we see cannabis businesses and they have many partners, many people that are, some are involved in the business, some are investors, and we see this a lot where somebody might just be chipping in money into the business because they need cash. Obviously, that's a very common scenario in cannabis. That all of that owner activity needs to be documented really well, and what the ownership percentages are, not just for AFS compliance, but there's more movements in this regard with the federal government is requesting more information about owners. And specifically, they're doing that to root out any corruption that may be happening in businesses. Obviously, if you're here, it probably means you are a compliant cannabis business and want to do the right thing. But unfortunately, there are a lot of bad actors in the industry, and they are definitely being targeted for money laundering and things like that by the federal government. So having those lists, your whole owner equity side of your business, and having those documented is extremely, extremely important.
Great, thanks, Mark. So general operational issues, and so this one's really just a catch-all of anything that doesn't fit into another category, such as packaging and labeling. This is also somewhere that they might put something that isn't a huge violation in another category, and they're really just lumping it together. So here's a few that I found online that people are receiving. So marijuana consumption on site, right, which is definitely not allowed, and that can also turn into that you can't sell or consume food on site. Obviously, your employees have a break area and they can eat their food and drink water and things like that. But offering a meal in the dispensary or something like that wouldn't be allowed. And with marijuana consumption, making sure that customers don't have access to the marijuana. That's super important. Another one is separation of spaces and business records. This is if you have a co-located facility. And now that we're seeing, medical and adult use co-located facilities, this is definitely a big one. Your records are required to be kept separate, just because you might have the same ownership structure and the same business. They're still considered two different entities or licenses in the eyes of the CRA. Not having proper security when it comes to restricted and limited access areas is a big one, making sure that these areas are designated and that there's no way that a consumer could get into a restricted or limited access area, but also that you have the proper access controls in place so that employees can only access areas that they need to, right? The vault, for example, might not be available to every employee that you have. Excessive plant count or going over your plant count in a cultivation facility is one of them. And also making sure that you're only using the approved pesticides and plant additives is very important there. Or operating beyond the license scope. So that would be, if you're somewhat similar to excessive plant count, right? Or possibly doing an extraction method that wasn't approved or revealed to the CRA, or selling to adult use customers if you're only licensed for medical. METRC non-compliance. So this is technically number 3 on the list, but not by many. So this one is a big one, just like the AFS that we were discussing. So the first one is products not logged into METRC. So the easiest way to do this is make sure that you're at least accepting all of your METRC manifests every day for incoming inventory, even if it's not available for sale yet or ready to be extracted, making sure that that is done, part of your closing procedures. And products lacking METRC tags. So this is something they're visibly going to be able to see, but also digitally, right? So as they walk around your facility, all of the bins, storage locations, things of that nature need to have the METRC tag with it. So the METRC tag, I'm sure you know, rips in half, and you can have 2 different locations. I'm not positive, but in most places you're allowed to make a photocopy of that tag. That also serves as putting your METRC tag with the product. But this is also really just in general inventory organization and control. It's best practice to make sure that those tags are visible at all times. On the sales floor, this can get a little bit difficult. I've seen a lot of people put it at the back of, let's say you have a hanging display and it has all these lollipops on it or something. At the back is the METRC tag hanging. Basically, these RFID tags are used where they could come in with an RFID gun and scan the room, and it would register all of the tags in the room. So you just want to make sure that everything gets caught on that registration. Missing or inaccurate information in METRC. Now, if you're one of the METRC users, you know that it's easy to make mistakes in there and not all mistakes can be fixed. So it's important to limit the number of people who are entering information into your METRC system. It's also important to verify that information before you put it in. And to then, if you do make a mistake, to move to fix it. Now, if you can't fix something, and a good example is the wholesale cost on a METRC manifest, once it's accepted at the other facility, you can no longer edit that, and there is no way to go back and change that. It's best practice to have an inventory incident log where you can record things that you can't necessarily fix digitally, right? This could be a running log. It's impossible to remember everything that happens in your system or on a daily basis. So if you can't fix something, making sure that you're recording that. And if you ever send in a METRC ticket or a question to METRC, they'll give you a ticket number. It's best to make sure you keep the records of tickets and communications with METRC as well. Inconsistencies in employee data within METRC. So you are supposed to list all of your employees in METRC. Now, when you list them in METRC, you do not need to give them access to the system. So I suggest using the METRC employee section as your employee record, but you do not need to give everybody access. So making sure that's up to date, especially when people are hired or are let go, is a very good time to be monitoring that. Okay, the top four violations is non-compliant sales. So this one seems easy enough to monitor, but it still slips through our fingers, right? So the first thing is ID verification. Employee training is very important, ID books, ID scanners. And especially if you're using any out-of-state IDs for adult sales, this becomes a little bit more complicated. On the medical side, that would include their medical card verification and verifying that through the portal. Sales of products on administrative hold. So in METRC, sales that are on administrative hold have their own tab under your packages. So it's packages, inactive, active, on hold. So you can always check that. That's a great thing to make as part of your opening and closing procedures. If something is on hold, making sure that you remove that entire batch from the sales floor and putting that in a place in your secure storage location that is labeled so that it doesn't accidentally get sold. I'm sure this happens a lot because you might have multiple batches of the same product and one batch is on hold and the other one isn't. Something to be aware of, but that's a big one. It would be nice if the system would stop you from selling it, but since we're using a point of sale, that's not really an API connection to METRC, but you can always monitor that. Another good tip for that is to have a digital room in your point of sale system where when things are put on hold or they're in waste, you can move them to that room so that they cannot be sold. In point of sales, there's usually options for locations. This is a for sale room versus a not for sale room. So just making sure everybody knows the procedure when things are on hold or become waste. And improper home delivery. So this is all really based around not following home delivery procedures, not even having home delivery procedures, going through home delivery in an improper way. So making sure that you have all of that required documentation is very important. I think that's a really easy one for them to come in and ask for is show me your procedure for home deliveries. And the last one is selling over the sales limits. So these sales limits, I'm sure you're aware of. I mean, if you're not a dispensary, maybe not. But it's important to make sure that these sales limits are set in your point of sale. I can't think of any point of sale that doesn't allow you to put that in the system. And so it's very important to be monitoring that. On the medical side, there's a portal that you must sign into and verify that you're not selling over the limit to this medical consumer. So on the medical side, it's up to 2.5 ounces a day. Only 15 grams of that can be concentrate or a maximum of 3 immature plants. But in the total month, they can only purchase 10 ounces of marijuana. So you're looking at 2 different sales limits there, right? Cumulatively over the month and cumulatively for the day. And on the adult use side, that's 2.5 ounces per transaction with the 15 gram limit of concentrates. So they basically have the same daily purchase limit or per transaction limit, but verifying this and making sure you don't sell over the first line of defense is putting those limits in your point of sale system. Okay. So just quickly, as I mentioned, we're not trying to sell you anything here, but we do want to make sure you know that we are here as a resource. Okay, Mark, you want to go over some of the things that you guys offer that could be helpful in these violation situations?
Absolutely. So, first of all, if there are issues before you get to that AFS part of your accounting journey, we can certainly look at your balance sheet and income statements, maybe ask some clarifying questions, do kind of a trial run of what the audit is going to look like, to maybe point out some things that maybe you need help with before you're ready to have your CPA perform the full report. So that's certainly something we can do. We also can just perform the full report as an attestation. As accountants, if we are doing the performing of that, that means we can't do any other accounting to remain independent, but that certainly is something that we can provide. And then our bread and butter really is to work with businesses on a monthly basis. So if that is of interest and that can provide, beyond just the audit trail management, but also financial clarity, certainly something that we can help you with.
Great, thanks, Mark. So budding operations, first of all, we offer customized monthly retainers. These can be very affordable. As I mentioned before, We're just here as a barrier between you and METRC and the questions and issues that come up with data entry and fixing errors of things you put in. We currently have a lot of people on this retainer and they just call, text, or email me questions. Most of them can be answered with a yes or no. It just gives your employees a way to know that they have a resource without raising their hand to any of the agencies. Simplifying metrics. So we do a lot of metric training, a lot of metric audits. I have plenty of clients that retain us to do monthly metric audits at the end of the month. This also fuels accounting, right? Then we're giving accounting proper inventory data at the end of the month, which is one of the only things in a dispensary that you can put in your financials to help any of your taxes or balance sheets. But also, inventory accuracy is so important to running any business. So although this is a compliance requirement, you do get a lot of information out of good inventory data. And then a lot of employee training, and this goes outside of METRC training. We definitely offer state-specific compliance training for your employees. You can purchase this as a recording and use it when you hire new people or as a refresher. And some of these things could be great mitigation tactics when dealing with inspectors. Okay, so I left a fair amount of time for questions and answers here. If anybody has any questions, if you would like to reach us afterwards and keep some of your personal questions private, that's also absolutely okay.